Adeline Blanchard Tyler, the first deaconess in the Episcopal Church. My quest for Adeline began here in the archives of Boston Children's Hospital. Their collection includes nearly 100 letters to and from Adeline and a portion of her unpublished biography. The manuscript is identified as written by her brother. Yet credit for the biography goes not to her brother, who died in 1834, but to her sister, Catherine, and her niece, Lizzie. From Catherine's will. Should I not live to complete the memoir of my dear sister Adeline Tyler, I entrust the undertaking to my niece, Elizabeth. 3 portions of the memoir survive in 3 repositories. One goal of my work has been to study these manuscripts and reunite their texts. Born in 1805 in the farming community of Billerica, Massachusetts, about 20 miles northwest of Boston, Adeline was the youngest of 5 children. Her father, Jeremiah, owned pew number 12 in the Congregational Church, where the siblings were baptized Sunday, June 1st, 1806. Catherine was born 4 years later. Adeline was 13 when her father died. After completing her education at the academy in Billerica, she taught in Mrs. Sarah Bradford's school. There, she met Sarah's brother, John Tyler, a successful Boston auctioneer and widower with 4 children. Lizzie. Adeline and John were married in 1826 in spite of much opposition from my grandmother, who naturally objected to a connection between this blooming girl of 21 and a man of 50 with 4 children, the eldest older than his wife. Less than a year after their marriage, a violent attack of inflammatory rheumatism left him partially crippled. In spite of his infirmities, he was able to attend to business, but he suffered almost continual pain. His was a familiar figure on the streets of the city, seated in a low carriage of unique design, built for his own special needs. In trying to relieve him, his wife acquired that wonderful skill in nursing, which she possessed. Her husband and most of her connections attended the Unitarian Church. She had gone with him not because she was a Unitarian in belief, but because she enjoyed as an intellectual treat some of their ministers. When she began to feel the importance of caring for her soul, she was naturally inclined to seek the church which her brother, an Episcopal minister, had so loved. Adeline joined Boston's Trinity Church. She continued to care for her invalid husband while becoming involved in Trinity's ministries, the organization of St. Stephen's, the City Mission Chapel and Home for the Destitute, and the Seamen's Aid Chapel. Here was laid the foundation of a life and religious character consecrated to God and to her fellow man. John Lee Watson, assistant minister at Trinity, said, "Nothing could deter her from undertaking any service to the poor, the sick, and the destitute of any class and description." Adeline flourished at Trinity, but in the spring of 1846 she left abruptly. Watson, who was a high churchman, and Bishop Manton Eastburn, who was not, had profound disagreements, leading to Watson's resignation on April 9, 1846. 3 days later, on Easter Sunday, Adeline attended services at the Church of the Advent. There she found a new parish home. The parish was established less than 2 years earlier. From the circular by the rector, William Croswell, the Church of the Advent has been recently organized to secure the ministrations of the Protestant Episcopal Church to the poor and needy. After 3 years in rented halls, on Advent Sunday, 1847, the Advent held its first service in a new place of worship, a remodeled meeting house on Green Street. Among the worshipers was a young man 17 years of age, Charles Chapman Grafton. Grafton, a law student at Harvard at the time, would become an important figure in Adeline's life, especially in her later years. John Tyler died shortly after their silver wedding anniversary. Lizzie quoted reports of the funeral. The stores on Central Wharf and vicinity were closed during the ceremony. The Church of the Advent was crowded, the floor of the house being nearly occupied by downtown merchants. The funeral train numbered nearly 100 carriages. His death affected Adeline profoundly, says Catherine. From this date until her last days, Mrs. Tyler's whole soul seemed absorbed in the one thought of doing good to the poor and suffering. She threw her whole energy into the charitable work of the parish. That charitable work was given new life and energy by the Advent's second rector, Bishop Horatio Southgate. To offer the ministrations of the church to the poor and needy, Southgate and a group of Advent laymen had founded the parish's Holy Guild in 1852. Membership was initially limited to male members of the parish. Within a year, the bylaws were amended to include women. Adeline assumed, at Dr. Southgate's earnest solicitation, the duties of matron of the parish school, and took the superintendence of the parish house for widows and aged couples. She came to be known as the Lady Abbess. Bishop Southgate would later reflect that the few years of her work in Boston were but an apprenticeship for her ampler career of charity, which followed in other fields. While still holding her connection with the charitable work in the Church of the Advent, Mrs. Tyler received a letter from the Reverend Horace Stringfellow, Jr., offering her the position of headship in the infirmary he was about to establish in Baltimore. He assured her, "I have the most hearty cooperation of the bishop, William Rawlinson Whittingham. I am firmly persuaded that we shall open up a work of faith and love, a work in which both may be tried as if by fire, and yet it is enough for us to know that it is for the honor of God and his salvation of men. From what I have heard, I am sure that you are qualified for the position and that God has called you to it. Will you not come and help us in his name?" Stringfellow shared his vision with Whittingham. Among all the plans for alleviating the destitution, both temporal and spiritual, presented to my view, that of returning to the church the primitive order of deaconesses seemed most desirable. Catherine. It was a great struggle for my sister to sever her connection with the Church of the Advent, relinquish the work with which she had been there so long identified, and remove from the city of Boston, which had been home for so many years. But in Baltimore there seemed to open to her a large and important field for that particular kind of church charity for which she was so admirably fitted. She removed there on the 18th of September, 1856, accompanied by a lady friend who was to be associated with her in the infirmary. The lady friend was 28-year-old Caroline Elizabeth Guild, called Carrie, also a parishioner at the Church of the Advent. I found 2 ladies who had long desired to unite themselves to such work. A residence for the sisters, and the hospital is now ready for occupation. We have room for 15 beds beside the portion set aside for the sisters. Stringfellow's two ladies are Eveline Black, 21, and Catherine Kate Menard, 19. Adeline and Carrie brought the number to 4. Catherine. On September 21st, St. Matthew's Day, 1856, St. Andrew's Infirmary was formally opened by Bishop Whittingham with appropriate religious services, the celebration of Holy Communion, and the solemn setting apart of Mrs. Adeline Tyler and 3 other ladies for the work of deaconesses in the Diocese of Maryland. Whittingham charged them, "You are to be servants of the Church of God as deaconesses, specially in ministering to the sick and poor, prisoners and outcasts, the destitute and the oppressed, helpless and orphan children, and the abject and friendless penitent." With this solemn ritual, Adeline, Carrie, Kate, and Eveline embarked on their lives as deaconesses. In an advertisement in this 1857 republication of the Office and Devotions of the Lutheran deaconesses at Kaiserswerth, Germany, Whittingham states that no sanction is intended to be given to the form of ordination. The right and expediency of the adoption of any such form in the Episcopal Church are meant to be left open questions. It would be more than 30 years before General Convention enacted a canon recognizing and regularizing the office of deaconess. Deaconesses would continue to serve in the Episcopal Church throughout the 20th century. Some extracts from a journal which my sister kept show with what simple faith and loving devotion she and her associates had entered upon that charitable work. On the day after the opening service, she commenced her duties, arranging furniture which had been brought from Boston, organizing and systematizing the work of the 3 sisters under her care. Adeline wrote, "Sister Carrie and I stayed in the house last night and rose this morning with cheerful hearts and a firm faith, although its dawn found us without fire or food. By God's blessing, we were able to obtain the latter, and by the aid of a spirit lamp to prepare the same. With renewed hopes and energies, we begin a work which can be sustained only by fervent zeal and never-swerving faith." Adeline created a chapel in the infirmary. "I have been very busily engaged this morning in preparing our little chapel for service, hoping to enjoy the united prayers of our Christian band within its walls. The Reverend Dr. Cox of Grace Church has been here with one of his vestrymen, J. Mason Campbell, who gave us a check for the rent of the house for 1 year. Thus, God in his infinite care makes us feel his approval of our work." The following Sunday, she wrote, "The day is fine, and our service has been perfected by the administration of the Holy Communion. May its strengthening and life-giving grace make us zealous in every good work." The deaconesses would need every bit of that strength, grace, and zeal, because just over a month after the infirmary opened, Stringfellow, in ill health, unable to sustain the parish, the infirmary, and his family, resigned from St. Andrew's and left Baltimore. The deaconesses immediately asked Bishop Whittingham to provide pastoral supervision, which he agreed to do, appointing William Cross Crane, St. Andrew's new rector, warden, responsible for the day-to-day ministries and spiritual health of the bishop's beloved daughters in Christ. Adeline developed a close spiritual friendship with Bishop Whittingham, who called her his first deaconess or chief deaconess. Years later, as she considered a move back to Boston, she wrote him, "One painful thought is present with me at this change. Must it sever the relation I have so long enjoyed with you as my chief pastor, in whom I found not only a spiritual director, but the friend and sympathizer through the many trials that encompassed me?" The ties that bound them included the presence in Maryland of Charles Chapman Grafton. While a law student at Harvard, Grafton was confirmed and became a parishioner at the Church of the Advent. He was later ordained by Whittingham and for a time was chaplain to the deaconesses. Baltimore's high churchmen rallied to support the deaconesses' work. Charles Rankin, rector of St. Luke's Church, preached at Grace Church on the eve of St. Matthew's Day for the benefit of the infirmary. His text was from Romans 16. "I commend unto you Phoebe our sister, which is a servant of the church. Receive her in the Lord as becometh saints. Assist her in whatsoever business she hath need." The offertory amounted to $100. On the feast of St. Andrew, Adeline recorded, "At the bishop's visitation, 4 patients were confirmed and for the first time received the Holy Communion. 21 patients had been received into the infirmary. 11 were discharged, 3 had died. In addition, there were more than 30 regular outdoor patients. A charity school was set up for vagrant children, 56 in attendance, and a church school. Crane reported, "None of the inmates have failed to realize the spiritual benefits, no less than the kindest and most skillful nursing care." Speaking of the deaconesses, he added, "We can now expect with confidence the most blessed results from the tried efficiency of those dear handmaidens of the Lord. Nor can I believe for a moment that the Church, when made acquainted with their work, will fail to cherish and support it." But not everyone was enthusiastic about the new deaconess ministry. Mary Menard, the stepmother of 20-year-old Deaconess Catherine Menard, wrote to Bishop Whittingham, "It was very much against my wishes that Kate joined the institution, for I felt that her duty was first to her own family, and that she was too young to judge for herself. Since being here, however, and seeing how happy and cheerful she is in her new home, and how useful she is endeavoring to make herself, my opposition is entirely taken away. I cannot but acknowledge with gratitude the goodness of my God, who has been pleased to hear my prayers in her behalf, and made her a child after his own mind, and one who I hope will do honor to her profession." Kate would later found the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. In 1858, the deaconesses took charge of a new institution created by the merger of St. Andrew's Infirmary with Baltimore's Church Home, housed in the former medical college. From the Baltimore Sun. The report of the first deaconess shows a total of 36 patients in the beginning. Since that time, 37 males and 80 females were admitted, making a grand total of 153 patients. There were 32 children, of whom 15 remain. During the year, communion was celebrated 44 times, 18 times in private and 26 times in the chapel. 4 were baptized, 7 confirmed, and the funeral service performed 18 times. Catherine. From all over the country came applications from godly women who desired to join my sister and her band of deaconesses and to put themselves under the training of Sister Tyler. Adeline was both spiritual and temporal head of the institution, reading sermons and conducting the religious work of the home and infirmary, in addition to her duties as superintendent. The chief deaconess's peculiar care, the chapel, had been made from the upper part of the old medical school's surgical amphitheater. Its gallery was the gallery from which medical students had looked down on operations and autopsies. It had been designed at the heart of the new endeavor, and Sister Tyler's own life centered there. When chaplains failed, she herself read the lessons until a new chaplain could be found. Her faith established the custom of morning prayer, which the nursing staff continued for more than 90 years. Her desire was to see the small, bare, circular chapel made beautiful and seemly. A group of friends gave the rood screen. Her own silver was melted to make the chapel's communion service and alms basin. A font came from Boston, made to her design and at her expense. The font was crafted in coined silver by Gordon and Company. Presented to the Church Home and Infirmary by Sister Adeline Tyler, 1st Deaconess of Maryland, 1856. In January 1860, Catherine says, owing to a threatening physical breakdown, and with Whittingham's consent, Adeline withdrew from active duties of the Church Home and Infirmary. She and several other deaconesses would devote themselves to the care of the outdoor sick and poor, the nurture of the little ones for Christ, and the hard but glorious task of reclaiming the outcast and binding up the wounds of the despised and neglected, broken-hearted. At the commencement of the year 1861, the work of the deaconesses in their home was going on quietly but very successfully. Mrs. Tyler seemed justified in believing that the long-cherished and favorite object of her life was about to be accomplished in the establishment of a permanent order of deaconesses. There were at this time 12 admitted sisters and as many candidates for admission under training. The deaconess school was prosperous and numbered some 15 or 20 pupils. Mrs. Tyler's life work seemed within reach of full fruition when the fall of Fort Sumter awoke the whole country to the realization that there slumbered a social volcano beneath their feet. On the 19th of April, 1861, the 6th Massachusetts Volunteer Regiment, en route to Washington, collided with a mob in the Baltimore streets. Wounded soldiers were taken to the Central Police Station. That evening, Adeline crossed the turbulent city to render aid to the men from her home state. She was refused admission. Undeterred, she again requested to see the men, adding that the care of the suffering was her life's work. She was again denied. "Very well," she replied. "I am myself a Massachusetts woman seeking to do good to the citizens of my own state. If not allowed to do so, I shall immediately send a telegram to Governor Andrew informing him that my request is denied." This persuaded the chief officer to permit the 2 most seriously wounded men to be moved to her own home. They stayed for about a month while she nursed them back to health. Adeline thus earned the honor of being the first nurse to treat Union forces in the Civil War. A year after the conflict, Sergeant John Ames of Lowell, Massachusetts, wrote to her, "I shall ever feel thankful that we fell into so kind and generous hands, for if I had remained in the station house till morning, I should not have lived to see this day." At the Army Hospital on Camden Street in Baltimore, Adeline's even-handed treatment of both Union and Confederate soldiers led to accusations of being a rebel sympathizer. She left, informing Whittingham, "I am ready to follow your wishes to work in any place you esteem the most useful. The cry in our streets today has been appalling to me. Stonewall Jackson in Baltimore with 40,000 rebels. May God preserve you from that day in Baltimore history." Whittingham responded to a plea for nursing assistance at the military hospital in Chester, Pennsylvania. "My chief deaconess," he wrote, Mrs. Adeline Tyler, notified me that she was ready for duty, but she is rather a superintendent of nurses than a mere nurse. She is very likely to bring other deaconesses or probationers with her. I will authorize her acceptance of duty. She is just invaluable." After Adeline took the position, she reported, "Yesterday we received 250 sick and wounded men. 24 are from the Confederates. 2 of them are very ill. 1 was baptized this evening. I stood as sponsor for him. Some of the rebels are from South Carolina, some Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri. Poor fellows, they bear marks of privations such as ours have not endured. We have now about 1,000 patients, some very ill." At a time when Dorothea Dix was turning away women over 50, Adeline, nearing 60, was likely one of the oldest nurses or nursing superintendents to serve in the Civil War, and her services were in demand. Catherine, "Surgeon General Vanderkeef urged my sister to come to the military hospital at Annapolis. She brought with her 5 or 6 Boston and Maine ladies who had volunteered to work under her protection and direction. Some of their names may be familiar: Louisa Titcomb, Rebecca Usher, and Hattie Southgate, daughter of Bishop Southgate." Adeline wrote to her sister, "My little world is so limited by brick walls and the River Severn that I have little to tell of except of the sad sufferings each day presents. My duties were never more needed than in this crisis of our country's struggle. We are just now relieved from the duties of nursing by the refusal of Jefferson Davis to exchange prisoners. I shall never take another position so responsible. Not that I am unwilling, but my working powers are exhausted. This long season of turmoil has made sad havoc with my energies." The terrors of war were reflected at the Annapolis hospital, where as many as 375 soldiers from the Gettysburg battlefield were received in one day and quartered in the 40 buildings and 1,000 tents which constituted the hospital wards. Adeline, "Time passes so rapidly with me. I think of a day and it is gone. Life is in the past. Friends are only in remembrance. I am looking soon to be relieved from this responsibility of seeing some 1,000 men each day. I visited a poor boy whose life seemed yielding to that destructive but prevalent disease, pneumonia. I left him reluctantly, and only because nature forbids that I should remain up tonight. The average Civil War soldier was 26 years old. 143 pounds, 5 feet 8 inches tall. Approximately 1 in 4 soldiers that went to war never returned home. Spring 1864. We are expecting several hundred paroled prisoners to arrive in a few days. Much as I desire their release, my heart beats with horror for the awful sights of suffering they will present. Mrs. Tyler procured a number of photographs of these wretched men, representing them in all their squalor and emaciation. These were the first which were taken. With these, Mrs. Tyler did much good. She had a large number of copies printed in Boston, and both in this country and in Europe brought them forward as unimpeachable witnesses of the truth of her own statements. Physically exhausted and spiritually depleted, Adeline wrote to Catherine, "Although our contest still rages and the dead are calling upon us to stay this wicked warfare, I have, in the midst of it, decided on leaving my country." Lizzie noted, "Aunt Tyler is broken down by her labors." Bishop Whittingham provided her with a letter of introduction. Our beloved sister, Adeline Tyler, widow, chief deaconess of the Diocese of Maryland, being about to travel with our consent, is earnestly commended to your good offices of Christian love, as one in all respects worthy of the same, for her godly conversation and high repute and trust in this branch of the Church of Christ. Adeline was in England when the war ended. After her return, she and Evelyn Black once again worked together, this time at the Midnight Mission for the rescue of fallen women in New York. Which brings us to the third and final portion of Catherine's memoir manuscript in the archives at Boston Children's Hospital. A young physician, Dr. Francis Brown, embarked on a campaign to recruit Adeline as lady superintendent for a new hospital for children being founded in Boston. "The trustees wish you to take charge of our house. It is a good work and will be a large and permanent one, and will offer a field for zealous, earnest Christian labor." This novel undertaking, a hospital exclusively for the care of children, was a milestone in the emergence of pediatrics as a medical specialty. Dr. Brown showered her with letter after letter. Adeline was reluctant to leave the Midnight Mission, but he persisted, traveling to New York to meet with her, showing her the proposed layout of the new hospital, even sketching the desk he had procured for her use. Adeline asked Bishop Whittingham for guidance. "Will you give me direction for my future duty in the common causes to which I wish and hope to consecrate all my work?" He replied, "If it be that you going to take this affair is the condition to keep it out of the hands of either Unitarians or Romanists, and that it will secure the work absolutely for the Church, then knowing you and your principles, I should say, go. God will take care of you and will carry you through with a work undertaken in His name and for His blessed household's sake. Go, if it be true that your going to Boston is to make a Unitarian enterprise a churchly work and keep it out of papal clutches, in the name of the builder and master of the holy household, go." Adeline went. Catherine. Before Mrs. Tyler accepted the position, she told the trustees, If I go, I shall certainly have all the unbaptized children baptized in the church, and train them all up as far as I can in my own faith." They replied, "You may teach them just what you choose, if you will undertake to take care of their poor, suffering bodies." The Reverend Dr. Chandler Robbins, a trustee and a Unitarian, praised the beautiful and striking effects produced by the admirable management of the superintendent and the ladies associated with her. A neater, more orderly, harmonious, and happy group of children cannot be found in any Christian household. As was her custom, Adeline had created a space set apart for services. The oratory is very high up, being a part of the attic. It is nicely furnished with a very nice altar of oak with painted panels. We have been having 2 services every week. Adeline and her staff tended to both spirit and body. "We are having a severe time with measles in the house. 9 children have them out of 25. They are very much about." The Church of the Advent was now located in a former congregational meeting house on Bowden Street. Adeline wrote to her sister, "My church privileges are very fine. We are in walking distance of the Messiah, and not a very long ride to the Advent. The latter seems more home-like." As Christmas approached, she reflected, "How changed are our Christmas congratulations since the last anniversary. So many gone to rest, while we toil on in the sad enjoyment of the blessings and trials that beset our way." After 3 years at the hospital, her energy flagging, she turned to Grafton, a founder and member of the Society of St. John the Evangelist, newly called as rector of the Advent, for help. She told her sister, "I am intending to resign as soon as I can learn from Father Grafton if St. Margaret's Sisterhood will take the work. I am anxious to give up before I am taken from it." The advent of this our secular year brings us nearer that time when the toils of life will be exchanged for such other life of joy or sorrows as this life has gained or lost. My own day seems nearly run, and when I look at the little I have really done, I am ready to exclaim, "O Lord, send me help from thy holy place." Grafton reassured her of her legacy. "What you will leave after you will not be a sisterhood trimmed up, as I once thought the Deaconess was going to be, but you will give impetus to the movement in various parts of the land and effect more than we can now see." She told Whittingham, "I am constrained to resign my position owing to my increasing cares as well as advancing age, which each year must take from my energies. This was personally a very hard thing to do, but I was obliged to make judgment take precedence of my affection and yield the heart's love for the better conduct of our growing institution. In justice to it, I give it up." Adeline and Grafton succeeded in bringing members of the Sisters of St. Margaret from England to assume nursing duties at the hospital. Whittingham wrote to Adeline, "Next to yourself, I suppose no one could be so likely to carry out your plan and way of working in quiet, unobtrusive steadiness, aiming at the great ends ever in view, as a sister from St. Margaret's East Grinstead. The Sisters of St. Margaret faithfully served at Children's Hospital for 45 years. Relinquishing the work was wrenching for Adeline. This separating from a work so dear to my heart, and for which I have given so many prayers and labors of love, rends my inmost soul, and I sometimes think it will be too much for my strength. By God's help, I hope to be sustained. She took a room 2 doors down from the Church of the Advent. My home is very comfortable and so near the church that no weather need keep me away. It is a great privilege now that my ability for any secular occupation is taken from me. I sometimes feel restless under this divine order. I know it is not right, but human nature rebels against the divine will. We had a beautiful Easter in the church, although outside the way was very wet and cold. Our church was simply dressed with flowers about the altar, in very good taste, no display. Our service was grand, and the sermon such as no one but Father Grafton can preach. Not that I think his intellectual powers of the highest order, but the spirit soars very high. We had beautiful banners worked by some of the ladies under the direction of Sister Teresa, who is in charge at the Children's Hospital. At her physician's urging, she traveled to England in the summer in the company of friends from the Advent and the Society of St. John the Evangelist. She stayed in Oxford near her Cowley Father friends, visited cathedrals, churches, convents. At St. Margaret's in East Grinstead, she attended the profession of 28-year-old Emma Pearson, a friend from the Advent, who took the name Sister Agnes. After Adeline returned to Boston, despite increasing infirmity, she told Catherine, "I want to start a society like your Working Women's Benevolent Society. I told Father Grafton I would get your constitution to show him and also ask how you raised the fund to start. I remember giving $5 at the onset. We have had a class of young women in the past year meeting in our guild room every week for instruction. It has been quite a success, now numbering some 60 girls who knew nothing of the church before." Aware of her failing health, she wrote her will, December 30th, 1874. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, Amen. I, Adeline Tyler, being of sound mind and memory, do make this my last will and testament. Ever the organized, thoughtful administrator, she arranged the dispersal of her plate, jewelry, ornaments, engravings, books, and other articles, concluding, "Finally, I give, devise, and bequeath unto the Church of the Advent all the residue and remainder." She died 10 days later, just 69 years old. Grafton officiated at her funeral. Arthur Ritchie, previously an assistant at the Advent, now at Mount Calvary in Baltimore, was the celebrant, this at a time when communion was a novelty at funerals. It fell to Grafton to inform Whittingham of Adeline's death. You will not be surprised to learn that Mrs. Tyler was called to her rest on Saturday last. Her illness was a very suffering one, though at the last she did not suffer so acutely, and her faculties were clear. She was laid to rest at Mount Auburn Cemetery, joining her husband, his first wife, and other family members. Her death was mourned in New York at the Midnight Mission. Her intelligence and dignity were so tempered by gentleness and affection that she commanded respect and won confidence and love. In Boston, Dr. Brown wrote to her family, the hospital managers desire to express their cordial recognition of the lifelong labors of Mrs. Tyler in the course of Christian works, of her loyalty to her country and its defenders in the late rebellion, of her tender sympathy with the poor, the suffering, the outcast, the children, and especially of her faithful and efficient labors in the Children's Hospital during the first years of our existence. In Baltimore, a Civil War trail marker commemorates Adeline and the history of the Church Home and Infirmary. Adeline's story could not be told without the loving devotion of her sister, Catherine, who died in 1884, and her niece Lizzie, who died in 1895. May my efforts to tell Adeline's story be a fitting continuation of their work and a fruitful contribution to the legacy of the first Deaconess. I am grateful for the support and encouragement of many people. And these organizations. But Adeline has the last word.